Good evening. This is Randal Neal, Christians United for Israel Western Regional Coordinator, and I just want to welcome you to CUFI. I'm just really honored and delighted to be invited to be able to share with you tonight. And just a few weeks ago, when our Associate Director, Shari Dollinger, invited me to do this, the topic that just leapt to mind was Jerusalem, understanding the Holy City in her year of Jubilee. And so I was going to draw from a number of presentations as a first hire for CUFI 11 years ago. There were a number of questions about Jerusalem and the dynamics and the demographics that really are key and instrumental to understanding the conflict and the complexities of it. And it seemed that for a long while there were questions that were elusive. No matter how up the echelons I climbed, the folks that should be able to know the answers to. And so we're able to finally connect some dots and fill in some blanks, and what I hope would be very equipping and informative and inspiring for a lot of you to help blow away a lot of fog and better understand just the inner workings of Jerusalem. We'll look at some of those questions, but clearly the historical marker that took place yesterday when President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem, ending 2 decades of postponing and kicking the can down the road since President Clinton actually passed or voted for the resolution to recognize Jerusalem and eventually move our U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And Donald Trump made a campaign promise, and he took the first steps of making good on that when he recognized the Holy City. It's curious how the world has responded. Israel's always been a topic that evokes passion. It's, Mom used to say at family reunions, don't talk about politics and religion. And when you speak about Israel, you kill both birds with one stone. It's something that will evoke passions at both ends of the spectrum. And those of you that travel in these circles know well what I mean. And so there are people that are ecstatic about these first steps of really embracing and recognizing our greatest ally in the Middle East. And then there are those that are fairly ominous and forecasting that that is just going to bring more violence. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to, this was going to be a presentation, even a multimedia presentation, but in light of what transpired yesterday, it's going to be more of a conversation. And there's a couple of questions that are going to be to the forefront, but before we address even the most obvious ones, I think it's important for us to put things in context. What exactly was it that prompted President Trump to choose this time and to take this courageous step and to okay, so I'm getting text messages already, and I'm getting confirmed exactly that what's on everyone's mind. And so before we delve into the response, I will have to say that of many responses from world leaders and experts in the Middle East and the Israeli conflict, it's important, I think, I'm going to point to Professor Alan Dershowitz. His was one of the more thoughtful replies. He's a Harvard law professor and a champion and an expert on the Middle East. His book, The Case for Israel, is a must-read if you don't already have it in your library. And his response to the recognition of Jerusalem was that it was very fitting to try to undo the damage that was done in the previous administration. And so for us to unpack and to take a look at how this recognition could possibly level the playing field and undo some of the harm that was done when the executive administration, the Obama administration, elected to not exercise our veto at the UN resolution for Resolution 2334 in December 2016. You may recall that UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, had been rewriting history and had actually come to the conclusion that any references to Jerusalem or the Holy Site, if it was going to be officially spoken from a lectern at the UN or printed in any of their materials, it would be referred to only in their Islamic names, blotting out any Jewish ties to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And that just kind of set the stage. And when UN resolution passed and the United States elected to abstain and not veto that resolution, essentially what happened was, though that resolution, I wouldn't say that it was toothless, but it did not have any enforcement mechanisms in it. and it was just pretty much priming the pump. And there were world leaders that were posturing and appearing that they were going to take steps to implement enforcement mechanisms. There was going to be a meeting in Paris, and it was very clear that that was probably what was going to be on their agenda, was to usher in another resolution before the president exited. Then we saw former Secretary of State John Kerry, and he came out and did a 73-minute, 6-point, 2-state solution plan. It's important to remember that one of the most famous speeches in this country's history is the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln took about 4 minutes to do the Gettysburg Address, and John Kerry took 73 minutes to explain, essentially to the world, to school them and wag his finger, that, let's face it, folks, until 1967, there were no Jews in this area. And he was referring to the pre-June 1967 areas, including the Jewish Quarter and the Kotel Plaza. So let's kind of hit the pause button. Let's go back in time a little bit, because as shocking as it may be to a lot of folks, what he said is actually absolutely correct. There were no Jews in those areas in 1967. There had been for about 1,000 years or more up until May 14th of 1948. But on May 28th, about 2 weeks after Israel declared her independence, Great Britain had pulled out. About 1,000 Arab Legion soldiers came in from Jordan, destroyed 55 synagogues. The day of May 14th, when that morning dawned, there were 1,600 Jews living in the Jewish Quarter in the old city of Jerusalem. By the time midnight struck, there were 0. That was the first time in over 1,000 years that there were no Jews in the Jewish Quarter. For 19 years, that was the case. What I would really like to do, and this is where we're going to be hitting the pause button and taking some bird walks from this historic day. Here we are in Jerusalem's year of Jubilee, and what more significant could really mark, such an important hour for her, such an important year for her, than having the world leader, the United States, recognize Jerusalem as her capital. But let's take a look at some bookends to put things in contrast. I want to be respectful to Jordan as a country that holds peace treaties since 1994 with Israel. But let's face it, she was an arch enemy of Israel, both in 67 and in 48. And so I don't paint with a broad brush, and it's with respect that we have to cite chapters in history for us to look at the backdrop to really bring us to where we are today. So 1948, 1,000 Jews are dispelled from the Jewish Quarter. Virtually every synagogue is destroyed, including the main synagogue in the old city of the Jewish Quarter, and it's left that way. It's very important for us to realize what happened to those residences, what happened to the area where people had lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, for centuries, and so that's one end of the bookmark, is to take a look how Jordan dealt with the Jews that were living in their ancient homeland, in their ancient holy city. And then let's take a look at it. We fast forward 19 years into the future, and Israel, it's very critical to realize that before the war broke out on June 5th of 1967, Israel watched her enemies mounting on her borders. She was listening to radio broadcasts that had been coming in daily for weeks, claiming that her streets were going to run with blood. They took those threats extremely seriously. Israel, you can take a look at the psychological snapshot that Israel was dealing with this vice that was being cinched and tightened down on her, with her enemies mounting on her borders. 5,000 tanks, almost 9-10 times in some of the hardware that Israel had to defend herself with. And to the degree that she's having rabbis, basically pray over city parks to turn them into mass grave sites and stockpiling body bags. And this is what she was facing when she went into the war. We know how the story ends. We've seen this year, we've had fabulous documentaries that have been released to help people learn this story. There's been a lot of books that have come out. For some reason, and I won't cite or fault any of the fabulous resources that we have available to us on this topic, But for some reason, there's a couple of chapters that are really critical for us to understand the big picture that seem they didn't make it into these narratives. And one of them is what I think is a real moral compass, the real the moral high ground that Israel demonstrates, in contrast to how she was treated and her Jewish residents were treated in May of 1948. Let's take a look at what Israel does when she goes into Jerusalem and recaptures her holy city. Granted, she quadruples her territory. We all know that story, and we're not going to, if you've ever had the pleasure of looking at David Brogg's presentation on the Five No's, or in his book, Reclaiming Israel's History, that chapter, you will learn time and time again exactly how tirelessly Israel has tried to make peace with her neighbors, and also what happens in 1967, where she quadruples her territory, and she makes the declaration to annex East Jerusalem, to reunite her holy, eternal, ancient capital. But she extends an olive branch out to the Arab League. And the Arab League was actually founded for the purpose of preventing the establishment of a Jewish state in then Palestine. And so Israel's foreign minister extends an olive branch out and says, look, we want to give you back 97% of what we just claimed as spoils of war against aggressor nations. The Sinai, the Golan, the Gaza Strip, and Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank. And she asks, we're going to keep East Jerusalem, but we will give you back 97%, even the oil wells in the Sinai, which are pretty nice to have. And all we ask is that you recognize that we have the right to exist and agree to negotiate with us so that we can become good neighbors. I've had protesters try to disrupt events when I've cited that, and when I've asked them to explain to me the Khartoum resolution, it's like a deer in the headlights. They have never even heard of it before. And the Khartoum resolution is a hinge pin in understanding the moral high ground that Israel extended. Now, we're covering old history, but it's very important for us to pick up the story and put some missing pieces into this puzzle. Of course, in September, the Arab League comes back with the Khartoum resolution, the famous 3 no's: no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Israel then, decides what can we do? That was an agreement that was made in '67. Doesn't necessarily mean that it stood on the table after that. And of course, Israel did, move into Gaza, then pull out again in 2005. And then we've seen development in Judea and Samaria, some of her most ancient homelands, lands that are spoken about repeatedly in the Bible. What happens now? So Israel goes in. She does clear. If you take a look at an ancient photograph of the Western Wall, often on the left side, depending on how the photo was taken, you'll see structures that actually forced little more than an alleyway up against the Western Wall. If you've seen pictures or if you have visited the Western Wall today, you'll see the fabulous Kotel Plaza. It's even got a live, cam stream that's 24 hours a day. But that wasn't the case in 1967. In 1967, you had the Moroccan Quarter, and the Moroccan Quarter had been dilapidated. In 1965, Jordan had gone in and actually evicted a lot of places on the fringe of the Moroccan Quarter. Some Palestinian Arabs actually moved into what few residences were still inhabitable in the Jewish quarter, and they evicted them. They wanted to keep the Jewish quarter just as a bare, open, gaping wound to demonstrate to the world that the Jews will never return to the city of Jerusalem. And so the Jewish quarter, with few residences were still barely inhabitable, were just overshadowed by just rubble and destruction. However, in the Arab quarter, you've got now, Israel just now annexes over off of East Jerusalem, and now she has 70,000 Arabs that are living in the city, which she just coordinated off. She does a complete census, about approximately 70,000 Arabs. Now, it begs the question, with the battle that was ensuing, with the gunfire and the tank fire and the mortars, why would they still be there? Why did they not flee? Why did they not think that they were in harm's way? And one of the most, reasonable hypothetical answer to that is that the radio waves that were coming in from Arab countries right up until the very last moment were bragging that they were driving the Jews into the sea. They were bragging that they were winning, even when they were fleeing themselves. Their radio broadcasts misled the listeners into thinking that they were having a victory over Israel. And so anybody that was in their home listening to the radio, they would have thought the gunfire was actually driving the Jews out of their holy city, but it was absolutely the opposite case. And so before you know it, the Jordanians are driven out, and Israel now has just inherited 70,000 Arabs. She extends full citizenship to all 70,000. Remember, Yasser Arafat's rising at this point. About 10%, approximately 10% of the Arabs take Israel up on her invitation to become citizens. And to this day, they enjoy rights and opportunities and privileges that you would have to go to you'd have to be a member of the Saudi royal family to have something that even parallels when it comes, or even comes close in the entire Arab world. What we've seen now from these 70,000 today, that population of Arab Israelis in East Jerusalem is a little over 300,000, about 325,000. And the recent poll, which is very inspiring, very encouraging, shows that about half of them, and bear in mind, 85% of them were born after 67. They've never known any other life other than being an Arab Israeli living in East Jerusalem. And about half of them, just in a recent poll, have demonstrated that they are proud of their Arab Israeli identity. They love their city. They realize life isn't perfect, but they realize it would be a lot worse elsewhere when they see what's happening. So one of the points that the anti-Israel camp enjoys great traction on is, and they use it when they try to use the allegations of apartheid as a club to bludgeon Israel with, to demonize and delegitimize her. And the reason the apartheid charge gets so much traction is because people like you and I have not invested the time had not invested the time to fully even understand or be able to define what apartheid is. And if you can't define what apartheid is, then you can't defend why Israel's not guilty of it. And so the charges of racism and apartheid, again, they cover a lot of ground because people just don't have the facts. They're not equipped and informed to be able to shut that down, to just be able to crush that. And when you understand these dynamics in East Jerusalem, those false narratives evaporate like a mist. Those 7,000 Arabs that seized Israel's invitation to become citizens, they and their descendants are enjoying the full rights that any Jewish Israeli will have. The 63,000 and their descendants that did not are wishing that they had, but they realize that, as they would tell you in an interview, they were afraid to. They would be hurled off the top of a tall building, they felt, if they showed cooperation or coercion with Israel. And so, we are seeing every year there's more and more of them that are applying to become citizens, and there's an increasing number of them that are actually enlisting into the IDF as well. But let's take a look and see if how we can connect the dots, because folks can't distinguish. They often don't distinguish. They don't know what the difference between a Palestinian is, or an Arab Israeli, or who are these folks that are living in East Jerusalem, but they're not citizens of Israel. They were not expelled. They weren't evicted. They were allowed to stay in their homes, but they rejected the invitation for citizenship. And so Israel scratched its head and came up with a special, unique identity for them called a permanent residency, where they have almost the same rights as a full citizen. They can't vote in national elections, and their ID cards can get them through most checkpoints, and they enjoy almost all the same rights, but not quite. They can't. They can vote in the municipal elections, but they can't hold national office. But I think one of the easiest ways, and I asked a dear friend of mine, Colonel Dan Terza, who was the chief architect of the security barrier in Israel, and he was chosen because his family goes back as far as I think their family tree ends in the 1600s, living there and being intimately familiar with the different tribes and families in the entire region. And I asked him a question. I said, Dan, is it possible that you could have a number of brothers They all, they're brothers, and they have a little different worldview. They have a little different ideology. And when they hear the radio waves coming in from Egypt in 1948, they believe them and they take off. They head to Gaza. They get out of then Palestine, what's about to become Israel. You've got another brother that was listening to the other radio waves coming in from Israel, and it said, just stay and become citizens. And so here you have the same last surname. You got the same blood flowing through the veins. And you can have a situation where you have cousins where one of them is serving in the Knesset, one of them is a surgeon in a pediatric hospital in Haifa, one of them is a member of Hamas in Gaza and can't enter in. He's not allowed in. He's not a citizen. He rejected it. One of them could be a leader in the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank in Ramallah. And so, if you just simply look at it with that one single thread that can connect all these different factions, I think it helps to blow away a lot of fog and to fill in some blanks. I think that it's important that folks are concerned about this important step that President Trump has made, and they're saying that it's going to derail the peace process. I often use and joke that I have the spiritual gift of critical cynicism. And I would ask you that when was the last time that there was a leader in the Palestinian Authority that would sit at the other end of a conference table if peace talks were going to be initiated? There has been no peace process, so there has been nothing to derail. If anything, this will probably bring them to the table, and they will try to get their piece of the pie while it's still happening. I think it's also important for us to note, I don't think it's a coincidence that this recognition passed the day after the Taylor Force Act. The Palestinian Authority's Pay to Slay initiative had the light shined on its underbelly, thanks to Christians United for Israel, by the way. We were the first ones to get behind that initiative, and we brought it to the attention. Over 1 million emails were sent by our members to our members of Congress. And look it up. I'm not going to take the time to explain it in detail at this point, but the bottom line is the Palestinian Authority incentivizes with financial payment compensation people that do carry out attacks to Jews, that kill Jews, attempt to kill Jews, or that are martyred or killed themselves in the process of trying to do it. And it absolutely drives people away from the peace process, or even wanting to recognize Israel with normal relations. So, almost lost my train of thought there. I think another question that is appropriate to put on the table in the wake of this, and none of us have a crystal ball. We know, there's still violence breaking out in Ramallah, and Hamas has called for a day of rage. But I think it's important for us to realize and appreciate a couple of things. One is Russia recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital back in April. And the media didn't even create a hiccup. What's curious is yesterday, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is today's successor of the World Islamic Conference, which was founded by Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in 1931. That organization was passed to boycott any Jewish merchants in then Palestine. And it has changed names over the decades, and today its descendant is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Yesterday, it declared that anyone that moves their embassy to Jerusalem, that all the member states will sever ties with that nation that moves their embassy. Curiously, Russia is an observant member of the OIC, and nobody had a problem. Saudi Arabia didn't have a problem when Russia came out. Iran didn't have a problem when Russia came out. So I think it's really important for us to, with all humility, we need to appreciate that the United States is a world leader. It is the premier world leader. And the example that I would cite is in 2014, during the Operation Protective Edge. CUFI, that here we had war breaking out, and Israel was looking at calibers of munitions that were Iranian originated coming into Hamas that were game changing. And CUFI did an emergency solidarity trip. We rounded up 49 pastors, or we rounded up several, 52 or 53 pastors representing 49 states. And we headed to Israel to just send a message of solidarity. And while we were there, a rocket hit within about a mile of the Tel Aviv airport. And for a fleeting moment, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, ceased all flights, all U.S. flights inbound to Israel. Within hours, countries across Europe did the exact same thing. They followed the suit. Within 24 hours, we lifted the ban. It was really just to hamstring and to insult and injure Israel. And within hours after us raising the ban and canceling it, they followed suit. I think that is probably an example that we're going to see. The security challenges that actually having a physical embassy in Jerusalem are unknown, and they're going to be challenging. But the initial steps of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, I think we're going to see nation after nation after nation follow the United States to garner favor with the U.S. And because the world realizes that Israel is taking the moral high ground, and Israel is their best friend in the Middle East. Even Saudi Arabia, I think, on the spectrum of things between an embassy being moved to Israel versus having the one ally that can help them be a bulwark against Iran encroaching into their region. I think that even the language that they're releasing today is some of the softest and more welcoming as far as waiting to see what happens in the future. So it's circling back. Here we are. For Christians United for Israel, for Christians, we are approaching the Christmas season. There's people that are tuned in tonight that pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as we're asked to do in Psalm 122. We know that you do, and if you don't, you got to start. If you already do, you got to take it up a notch. There's going to be folks that in the weeks to come, they're going to be cracking open their Bible, and they're going to look at Luke 2, and they're going to realize and remember as this Christmas season, is upon us. Simeon went up into the temple where he saw Jesus being dedicated. It's the city where Jesus was dedicated. It's the city that he cried over. It's the city that he was crucified, buried, and rose again in. It's a very important and precious city to him. And folks, if you're like me and if you find yourself in Jerusalem, I know there's a lot of folks that are watching now that will be going to Jerusalem in the weeks or months to come. No matter how busy you are, no matter how hastily your guide is trying to herd you to keep on schedule with your itinerary, somebody stop when you're in the old Jewish quarter. Open up Zechariah 8 and somebody just take the time to read it. And don't everybody read it, just let one person read it. And as you hear those words, you will see them manifested and fulfilled in fruition around you. You will see old men and old women walking with a staff in their hand because of great age. You'll see boys and girls again playing in the streets of Jerusalem. You'll be inspired and encouraged that the Lord uses predictive prophecies to remind us that our faith rests in a God that's in the business of keeping his promises. He makes promises that require miracles to be fulfilled so that he can reveal and glorify himself and get our attention. So let's pay attention. And let's just remember the words of a precious friend of ours, Major Elliot Chodoff. The temple was not built in Jerusalem. The temple did not make Jerusalem holy. The temple was built in Jerusalem because Jerusalem was holy. So on that closing note, I am going to just ask that we all keep in our prayers that God will bless Israel, that God will bless the United States, and that God will bless each and every one of you. And on this note, I wish my Christian friends a Merry Christmas and our Jewish friends a Happy Hanukkah. God bless you and good night.